let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. So it is a pleasure to have this fully woman webinar, and it's also a pleasure to have you here all for our last session of our Food for Sustainability webinar cycles on carbon sequestration. Today, we are focusing on the voluntary carbon market, or as many refer to, the VCM. My name is Claudia. I am the coordinator of Food for Sustainability Academy, the area of our collab dedicated to communicate science, a place for exchanging ideas and scouting for potential collaborations. So thanks for being here. And during this webinar, we will talk about how industries are interested in carbon reduction and how they can use farming projects to achieve carbon emission targets. We will start with Rize, a financial platform to assist farmers in their calculations to identify where the potential for carbon is and how to monitor this progress in order to emit carbon credits. I thank Audrey Jeannin for her presence here. Next, we take off to Finland to hear the learnings of a live project that's brought together farmers, researchers, and the industry to implement carbon farming as a real alternative to offset emissions for big energy providers. Thank you, Kirsi, for your presence. And without any delay, we will then make a stop in Seattle to meet Rebekah from Norway, a carbon marketplace which claims to have removed over 85,000 tons of carbon dioxide through 21 projects with more than $1.3 million handed over to farmers. This sounds promising, Rebekah. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. And with me, as always, I have a team that works hard to make all these sessions possible. I will ask the team to kindly switch their camera. So we have Rita Silva, our MA microbiologist, Daniela Fonseca, our sustainable chemistry PhD, and Silvia Moreira, our food science technology PhD. They all together also make part of our byproduct valorization team and are here to assist you throughout this session and with any further questions that you might have. So just before we start, let's proceed with some house rules. So first of all, questions are very welcome. Okay, this makes the debate more lively, and with this we make sure that we address the audience concerns or questions or doubts. So Daniela, how can the audience take part in our sessions?
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. You can ask questions in the chat. We just need you to put first the name of the speaker to whom the question is addressed, just to ensure the alignment of the questions and the debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela. Also, a short note to remind you that our webinars take about 1.5 hours. This session is being recorded, so please just keep your camera off if you do not wish to appear. And we are recording this so that the webinars can be viewed at a later stage. Rita, can you please let our audience know how they can find our webinars?
Sure, Claudia, thank you. It is a pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. All our webinars are on our website, and I will post the link in the chat where you can view them. I wish you all enjoy this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. And just in case that we have some specific questions about one of our projects, Silvia, can you please give us some more details on how participants can know a little bit more about our projects or eventually identify topics for future collaboration?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. If you want to know a little bit more about the Food for Sustainability current projects, you can just visit our website, foodforsustainability.org. I can place the link in the chat. You can also send an email directly to me or with any questions you may have, or to any other member of our team. And enjoy our session for today. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's indeed Food for Sustainability is indeed a lovely name, but sometimes it's hard to pronunciate. I fully agree. Thank you. And we will start as we always do. We'll start with some key ideas to contextualize what we are talking here. So I'll ask Rita if she could kindly share the screen.
Yeah, you can see my screen.
I personally
Yes, we can.
cannot. Yes.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see.
No. It's okay. So let's start with some key ideas. So I think there is no question about that there is a growing interest in better managing greenhouse gases emissions, and what we have noticed is that markets such as Europe and particularly California are at the forefront of the mechanisms to remove carbon for climate change mitigation. We were just discussing, and here in Portugal we are already 7 degrees higher than the average temperature for the month of May. So it's unquestionable that we are already facing a lot of challenges. Rita, next slide, please. So while the U.S. suffered severe acid rains during the late 80s, and this actually ignite change in terms of the carbon market, in Europe, climate action has been reinforced by the European Green Deal, which becomes a very ambitious package that includes measures for cutting greenhouse emissions, to foster investment in cutting-edge research and innovation in order to preserve Europe's natural environment. So we are in fact dealing with a huge goal. Europe has proposed itself to become the first carbon neutral continent by 2015, and this goal is supported by three main pillars. So Europe looks to increase the carbon credit price by investing in a well-developing platform, which is known as the EU emissions trading scheme. It has also tried to avoid all the leakages in the system by taxing products that come outside the EU, as in terms of carbon, of course, as if they were produced inside the EU. And this is through the so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism. And basically what Europe is trying to prevent is that the companies reallocate production to places where restrictions in terms of carbon are more relaxed than here in Europe. And at the same time, the government, there are a set of rules to incentivize governments to foster and to allow more investments in greening technologies, in technologies that actually reduce the carbon emissions. So we have a big, Rita, can we move? Thank you. So this definitely demands a comprehensive economic transition, and this means that lots of most of the economic sectors and even lots of the parts in the society need to be involved in this decarbonization, and special attention has been given to the energy system. Okay, decarbonizing not only energy production but also its users. It's key to achieve the goals that the EU has proposed for 2050. And just to put this into perspective, energy system accounts for more than 75% of the EU greenhouse emissions. So we definitely need to work on that. Rita, can you please move to the next slide? So I'm going to leave you here with a short video. Let's take just a very brief look on how all this works, because we have our guest to explain us more on that. Rita, please.
Let us break down for you how this all works. Every time an organization uses a resource that relies on burning fossil fuels, it creates carbon emissions, also known as a carbon footprint. Everybody has a carbon footprint. But when these emissions enter the atmosphere, they accelerate climate change, bringing, among other things, more extreme weather. Thankfully, the plummeting costs of low-carbon technologies and more resource-efficient practices mean that many organizations are reducing their footprints, becoming more resilient, and saving on energy expenditure. But reducing emissions is challenging, something that doesn't happen overnight. And with our present systems of energy and land use, preventing any carbon dioxide emissions is not currently possible for most organizations. This is where carbon credits come in. Buying carbon credits compensates for the unavoidable emissions you create today by financing projects that reduce or absorb carbon emissions anywhere in the world. Carbon credits increase the health and prosperity of communities around the world and combat climate change by financing projects that reduce the need to burn fossil fuels or draw greenhouse gases directly out of the air. Accreditations from internationally recognized standards give you the assurance that the projects producing your credits deliver the positive environmental and social impacts they set out to achieve. Moreover, your credits help finance projects that would not otherwise happen. So as well as offsetting your emissions, you are also supporting more sustainable forms of growth. How good is that?
Thank you, Rita. That sounds very, very good. And our panel members are here to guide us through this process, the process of having a more efficient carbon credits market. Is it really this simple and straightforward? And what sort of hurdles lay ahead for farmers, for certifiers, for intermediaries, and for the public policies? So we'll just start by inviting Audrey for her view, but let me just first briefly introduce you to Audrey Jeannin, with a very bad pronunciation. Audrey, apologies. Audrey is an innovation manager at Rize. Audrey has graduated from the French School of Science in Pau and joined Rize at the beginning of this year as innovation manager. Her career path includes several experiences in the innovation strategy, first as a consultant, and then with experience she applied to the sector space, particularly when she's joined the European Space Agency in the strategy departments. Thereafter, she specialized in space applications in an innovation center. Following on from those experiences, Audrey guides the innovation strategy of Rize, strengthening the added value of Rize services. Audrey, thank you so much for being here. And now the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for this introduction. So it's a pleasure for me to present Rize to you and present carbon farming. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if that works. Is it fine? So I guess this is, yeah, perfect. So carbon farming. As an introduction, at Rize, we believe that sustainable development is not only a question of environment, it's also about engaging people. And this is why we believe that finance will play a key role in the transition. And this is why our mission is to leverage carbon finance to accelerate the transition to sustainable agriculture. Carrying this mission means first providing farmers with support for decision making, which means providing them with knowledge to improve their practices and therefore being able to reduce their emissions and improve carbon storage in soils. And on another part, it's also about providing financial support and through carbon farming and also through better prices for low carbon products. So this is what we do by empowering farmers to change their practices into regenerative ones. So on one hand, through Rize platform, farmers can identify the most relevant levers to reduce their emissions or to increase carbon storage in soils, and therefore they will generate carbon removal, which we certify and we sell to corporations that want to move toward net zero footprint, so to meet their climate ambitions. So Rize sells those carbon removals, which have been generated by farmers on their behalf, and we transfer them the related financing. And as a reminder, 1 carbon credit is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 emission, which has been avoided. So this is our platform, where farmers, also with their agronomic advisors, can identify the levers in terms of practices, define their action plan, and get a calculation of the carbon potential, so carbon emissions that can be avoided. From there, they can also monitor it over time. And we also have an additional tool to define the interest of farmers to engage in that kind of project, where they can get a preliminary result in 15 minutes. So before going in that action plan definition, they can beforehand identify their interests, and for agronomic advisors, they can recruit potential interesting profiles of farmers through that kind of estimation, preliminary estimation. So concretely speaking, for this kind of farm, so in polyculture, for instance, where you would have a bit more than 100 hectares of arable crops, you would, for instance, implement cover crops and legumes in your crop rotation. And that would mean that you would be able to generate 1.25 carbon credits per hectare and per year. And as terms of CO2 is worth 30 euros, you would be able to generate a bit more than 4,000 euros per year as additional revenue. Yeah, then sorry, I think there is a little, I can't go further. Okay, I'm gonna go on the other, yeah. Sorry for that. Okay, so how we secure that financing to farmers? We developed an advanced MRV infrastructure, 100% in-house, so monitoring, reporting, and verification. And this infrastructure addresses key challenges. First, you have, sorry, I think you don't see it entirely. Yeah.
We are following you, Audrey. It's fine.
Yeah, okay. So first, you need to have carbon calculation models. So on one hand for soils, carbon in soils, and on the other hand for GHG accounting models. And our models are compliant with the best scientific standards. And on the other hand, we also develop traceability capabilities to be able to monitor carbon farming projects over time. And for this, we use satellite imagery. So this way, we are able to bring external validations to the data that we input in the calculation models. And therefore, we give a higher quality to the carbon credits that we generate. Because as you can imagine, carbon financing implies trust and verification. And so the more confidence we can give in those offsets, the highest value we will expect from the carbon credits that we will sell. And yeah, so those integration make our MRV infrastructure compliant with the best scientific, the best certification standards. Starting with the label Bas Carbone, which is a national standard in France, which has been issued by the French Ministry of Environment last year. So we integrated label Bas Carbone methodology, and you can see here the main principles of that kind of certification, which are first, the additionality. So as I mentioned in the video we just saw, the project, the carbon farming project could not have happened without that certification and compensation scheme. So this is the first thing. Then you need to be able to measure your progress. Carbon credits needs to be permanent. You need to ensure it's permanent and that your CO2 emissions, which have been avoided, won't come back again in the future. And then you need to be able to verify your projects, and this is where you would have also an audit phase at the end of the project. So this is the label that we use today. Tomorrow we could also integrate new schemes because there is also other types of certifications, such as those who are independent and geographically agnostic, as we saw in the video. For instance, VERA or Gold Standards are international organisms which are independent. And we could also expect a future carbon crediting scheme from the EU, which is currently under study. So maybe it's going to come next year or the year after. And we are currently assessing the opportunity for us to integrate these new types of certification standards. So this integrated approach enables us to deliver efficient and high-quality carbon farming, which is through a user-friendly experience, which is suited to farmers and to the farming ecosystem, which also takes into account the highest scientific standards with soil modeling and GHG calculation modeling, which also based the monitoring capability on satellite imagery, and also capable of delivering high quality carbon removal thanks to the certification that we use. And eventually we handle all the financial and economic engineering to then deliver those carbon credits and to finance also through new types of financing based on carbon performance. This is how Rize creates value, bringing the most of it to farmer. And as a matter of fact, Rize covers its costs by taking a commission on the carbon credits that are generated and sold. And this way, we depend on the success of the project, which makes our business model aligned with the farmers' interests. So here are some key figures about Rize. You can see that we have been created a bit more than 1 year and a half. We have now more than 25 partners which deploy our solution with more than 300 farmers, and we are a team of 19 people, and we are still hiring. So indeed, we started to commercialize in France at the end of last year. Currently, we are developing a proof of concept in Romania, and next year we're gonna expand and commercializing in Europe. And I briefly introduce you to Rize team to finish. So you can see we have a diversified pool of talents with strong technological and scientific backgrounds. So we are divided into science and certification, digital operations, and partnership and innovations. So this is how we make carbon finance easy through a user-friendly experience, which is based on cutting-edge technologies and high scientific standards in order to deliver high-quality carbon credits. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Audrey. That was a great presentation, and thank you for covering so many important topics to make these markets work. You mentioned engaging people, how we can incentivize farmers to make the decision. You even mentioned the price of the carbon credits, the methodologies, its principles, how you ensure that the carbon credits are permanent, your MRV system. So I think this is very useful insights. But before I start, asking a little bit more about the details of your operations, I had a question for you as an innovation manager hat. So as we saw, the Green Deal aims to foster innovation on technologies to reduce carbon emissions, namely through green financing. From your perspective, and you've been very close to the market, have these incentives been enough to promote innovations at the farm level? And if so, are there any major advances that you have witnessed in recent years?
So for now, at the level of farming, I guess carbon credits are the most innovative financing schemes to incentivize farmers. You would also have the CAP policy, of course, the Common Agricultural Policy, which more and more is going to have this eco regime, so eco schemes, to incentivize a farmer. But what we want to do is that it's more about incentivization than about constraints. And when we are going to CAP, it's going to be more and more about constraints. So our proposal for now is to incentivize and make farmers prepared to face carbon farming of tomorrow, so which is sustainable farming. And for now, carbon credits are the most innovative and the most suitable, maybe not suitable, but innovative and available financing. But we also want to develop other types of financing, and this is what I mentioned in my presentation, in particular through a better price or crop premiums, for instance, for those farmers who are able to deliver environmental compliant products, let's say.
That's interesting. That raised the question that Sylvia has just asked in the chat. So we are talking about incentives. You pointed to a figure of 32.5 euros, which probably, I don't know if this is enough to make sure that a farmer converts from fully conventional, because I can imagine, the cost of this transition probably cannot be covered by the incentives from the carbon credits. But Sylvia specifically asks, when you first approach farmers this concept, how do they react? Are they still open to the idea, or are they still skeptical? And I would just add here, do you need to go to those that are already doing some sort of regenerative practices to incentivize them more? Or do you also find that you can enter a dialogue with the more conventional farmers?
Okay, good question. Thank you for that. So at the moment, you would have farmers which are convinced, that's for sure, and they are eager to indeed adopt those new practices. And you won't see any troubles in making them engage into carbon farming. And you would also have other types of farmers which are more conventional, and there it's more about an opportunity and a financial opportunity, and this is where again finance plays the role of a key role in the transition. And there you would have the argument of, okay, it costs to engage in transition, of course. Maybe for now, carbon credits price do not cover everything, but prices are rising. We see more and more demand for carbon credits, and what we see is that the supply is depleting, and we need to be able to face the demand, and this is where prices are going to rise, and then it's going to be it's going to cover, of course, those costs without any problem.
And Europe has taken a lead on that by restricting the permissions, which has helped the price of carbon credits to increase, to make it more appealing. And also with the current world, at least European situation, we also noticed that the inputs for farming are getting prohibitive. So maybe this is actually a very good opportunity to start to look to other practices, not only because for sustainable reasons, but in terms of inputs, but also as an opportunity for extra financing.
Exactly. Yeah. Just to add, it's also a good argument is also about the resilience that you would enhance actually. In addition to the price, which is key, there is something about resilience, and what you see now with the Ukraine crisis and all the problems that we are facing, prices that are rising and so on. You would also have new arguments. Yeah.
Yes, let's fingers crossed to see how this all develops in the near future. Well, reaction from Raul. Raul has an interesting question, and Raul asks, we usually know the requirements for farmers, for example, the permanence in terms of practices to make sure that the carbon really remains in the soil. Are there any requirements for the industry? Like, how do we assure the industry, apart from buying the carbon credits, that is taking measures to reduce their emissions, their greenhouse gases emissions? So basically, we know what the farmers need to do to make sure that they are storing carbon, but from the industry side, so your buyers, your clients, do you need to ensure that they are also taking measures?
Yeah, very, very good point. Indeed, I totally agree that we need also to ensure that carbon footprint improvement is done on the side of the buyer. And to do so, for now, we have recommendations on how they could claim their offsets. That's one thing. So in France, we have an agency which makes recommendations on how you are able to communicate the difference between compensation and contribution, and so on and so forth. So this is something we handle to our buyers, and they need to sign a kind of a chart where they state those commitments of claims, but also they state that they are engaging in an approach of reducing their own emissions. This is how we handle it for now. Maybe there is a better way also to do that, but yeah, maybe little by little we will also learn and improve our processes, but this is how we do it for now.
Yes, that's interesting. It's all about engagement and the commitment, because it cannot only be on the regulation and making sure that people are not cheating or doing. People really need to be committed, because otherwise it would be very hard to enforce this sort of markets. Audrey, one other question. How do you evaluate changes in farming, such as crop rotation and other activities, to estimate the carbon credits? Do you have an established system in which farming practices are associated with a specific carbon sequestration figures? And I think you've touched upon this on your presentation, so probably could you just elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So indeed, we have calculations models, which in fact are based on the methodology which is approved by the label Bas Carbone. On one side, you have a soil calculation model, so how carbon is stored in soils depending on different parameters, types of soils and different types of crops and so on. So this is one model. And then, you input your data, and this will calculate the potential of carbon storage. And on the other hand, we have GHG accounting models, which is also based on different parameters. For instance, fertilizers. How much carbon emissions do I emit with that kind of fertilizer, and indirect, and also with indirect emissions, and so on and so forth. So we input a kind of fertilizer, and then we have the emissions which are associated.
Okay, and just one final question. The verification, is it in this area that all your knowledge about the space technology comes into place?
Yeah.
How is this
verification is twofold. You have verification with internal data, which are data from farmers, and you have verifications through satellite data, which are external and which enables us to be more objective, because we can see from the sky basically which if there has been a cover crop, which type of crop, and then we can certify farmers' declaration thanks to that. So yeah, this is where satellite plays a role.
Thank you. We already had some discussions about the challenges of measuring actually the levels of carbon storage, but I think at least having some good practices is something at least that gives us a start to develop these markets more. So Audrey, thank you so much for your explanations. I will now just move on to our next guest, Kirsi, and let me start by introducing Kirsi. Kirsi, she's the project manager of Life Carbon Farming Scheme, and she's also working in the future business development at ST1. ST1 Nordic Oil is an energy group whose vision is to be the leading producer and seller of carbon dioxide-aware energy. The group researches and develops economically viable environmentally sustainable energy solutions. SD1 focus on fuel marketing activities, oil refining, and renewable energy solutions such as waste-based advanced biofuels and industrial wind power. So oil refining started to be sexy again. Sorry. The group has over 1,000 SD1 and Shell branded retail stations through Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Kirsi is based at the headquarters of SD1 in Helsinki, and SD1 employs currently more than 1,000 people. So it's a huge organization. Kirsi, thank you very much for being here and to share the outcomes of this very interesting life project that you just have been managed for the last 3 years, I believe.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to tell us about our project. Actually, I will start sharing, and hopefully you can see the presentation now. Good. So
yes,
my
perfect.
name is, it's nice to be here. And for the start, our project actually started 2 years ago, and it will continue until next autumn. And it is funded by EU LIFE program, which is a preparatory program for policymakers. So our objectives is to find best practices of carbon farming and build a guidance for future carbon farming scheme. I don't know if you know, but EU is currently building a certification scheme for carbon farming, and this is one of the projects that gives input for that certification scheme. And our partners in this project are BSAG, Baltic Sea Action Group, and they manage the carbon action platform here in Finland. And I think Elisa was a couple of weeks ago presenting something, and they're part of the project, and also carbon action platform. And then we have
last week.
Last week. Good. And we have Tyynelän tila, which is a farm that has been doing regenerative farming for a long time already, and the farmer is also a scientist, so very, very much knowledge about carbon farming and practical knowledge also. And then we have Luke, which is a Natural Resources Institute of Finland, and they bring the scientific knowledge to this project. Then Puro Earth is a voluntary carbon marketplace, which is a partner who has given a platform us to pilot carbon farming and carbon credits in practice. And NEOT is a North European oil trade company, which is a subsidiary of SD1, and they have done a market survey from demand side to this project. Then I had this small presentation of SD1, and you already presented so well, so I'm just saying that we are aiming to increase the renewable energy percentage of our actions all the time, and we really want to also participate to produce sustainable carbon cycle and remove the excess carbon dioxide from atmosphere, and therefore that's why we are really interested in carbon farming and also technical solutions of carbon removals. So our project, we had objectives. We wanted to develop an understanding how to implement a carbon farming incentive scheme in European context. First, we wanted to identify factors, how the efficient market would work, what are the key roles and players and stakeholders, and what kind of framework it would need to work in practice. Then we wanted to learn farmers' aspects for carbon farming. We did some surveys and also some deep interviews. Then we wanted to demonstrate the carbon sequestration in different pedoclimatic regions in Europe, where we tested which kind of methods would bring out good results in carbon farming and soil carbon accumulation. And I thought I'm gonna first go through the incentive scheme, which we mapped for the carbon farming and carbon market and regulatory framework. And the value chain we mapped in this project was that we need the supply chain, of course, and demand part for the value chain. And the value chain starts from the incentive. The carbon farmers need some kind of incentive to start farming. Then after that, the validation of project needs to be done by some party. It can be some kind of authority or private party. Currently on voluntary market, this validation of project can be, for example, Perra or Gold Standard or Puro Earth, whoever brings the methodologies and gives the platform to do a project. Then farmer would do the actions to enhance carbon sequestration, and then we have this MRV, of course. The sequestered carbon needs to be monitored and reported and verified in the value chain. And once the carbon is verified, the issuance of carbon removal credits can be done, and they can be put on the registry to be seen. And after that, the demand side can buy the credits, and once they've bought, the credits must be retired, so they can't be used 2 times. So somehow the value chain needs to be built in a way that you have to avoid double counting. And the information, knowledge, training, learning, and understanding of the scheme is very important. And that is one of the key findings of our projects, that those parts need to be increased within farmers and also within demand side, so that first of all, the farmers can start to produce carbon credits. And as an incentive part, we really focused on finance and money. We also learned that there can be many other incentives for farmers to start carbon farming actions, because at the same time they can ensure the viability of the land and improve biodiversity or soil water capacity of soil. But we really concentrate on finance, and we mapped that this value chain and carbon farming scheme can be financed through public finance, which is a probably common agriculture policy method. Then it can be only a private capital which finance. Then scalability is quite low. That is our thinking. And then we also presented this combined model, which is carbon contract for difference. It's a one example financing method where the price which is paid for farmer is ensured, although the market price would be lower than the price which farmer gets. And if the market price grows and goes above the strike price which is paid for the farmer pays the excess amount back to the system. This is how farmers can be ensured that they get a feasible amount of money to make the action. Then we mapped these parts of the value chain. So validation of project really requires methodology to how to define the action of the carbon farming. It can be a very different methods, for example, grass cutting height or cover crop, or we also had this nutrient fiber improvement pilot, which is a very different method than, for example, cover crop. So each of the type carbon removal method would need a methodology which defines very precisely how the action is done and how the carbon sequestration then builds up. Then projects needs to fulfill the criteria, which Audrey already talked about: the additionality, permanence. Also, some parts needs to be look at the carbon leakage, and then actions happen. So action needs to follow the methodology, and I've added here the contract to define durability of the project. So that is one of the key findings also in our project, that one of the key criteria in carbon market is permanence. So if you can ensure very long permanence, for example, 100 years or 50 years, the carbon credits are more valuable than if you can ensure permanence of, let's say, 10 years or 20 years. And usually farmers are not keen to make do contracts longer than 5 years. 10 years is also quite long time. So usually contracts can ensure the durability of the project, but then it challenges the permanence, really. And next step would be the monitoring and measuring, how to ensure that all the carbon credits are measured and they are similar value. So if you produce carbon credit with cover crop or, for example, biochar, the measuring and monitoring needs to ensure that the carbon tons sequestered are equal amount. And reporting and verification by external auditor gives a credibility and transparency for the scheme. Then in the other end of value chain is the demand and use of carbon credits. So issuance is needed in transparent registry, so to ensure that the double counting is avoided. And we've mapped possible clients for the carbon credits. Currently, voluntary markets is a good place to sell carbon credits, but one possible option is also CORSIA, which is an aviation scheme, the aviation scheme for the international flights, where you can sell if you can fulfill their methodologies. And then other potential sectors are road transport, ETS sector, EU aviation, agriculture, maritime. And all of these sectors we've mapped, there is a willingness to pay because at some sectors it's very hard to they have very hard to abate emissions, and they are very high costly currently to reduce some of the emissions. So there is a willingness to pay, but somehow also demand sector needs to be incentivized from policy to use the credits, how they can use the credits. And then, yes.
Could we just, we are running a little bit out of time.
Yes, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Okay, so then registry system, very important for transparency. Then just a couple of slides, because few things I wanted to share that we've done this test modeling for farms and forests. We had 17 farmers and foresters all over the Europe where we tested and modeled carbon sequestration in their farms, and good results we got all over, from changing the grass cutting height, and also cover crops was a good, and adding green fallow we got good results. And then we did this survey and interview for supply and demand, where we got a lot of good farmers' views and how they see the scheme. And then we did this trading pilot where we traded this soil foods carbon removal credits, which were produced with soil improver fiber from pulp and paper mill sludge to store stable carbon in agriculture soils. And this pilot, we've sold 1,600 credits out of the pilot, and credits have been interested to those kind of customers who are not really interested of forestry sector credits, but also they were very new in Puro Earth marketplace, so it took a little bit while to make first sales of the credits. And I had here some key findings, but we can also go to the questions already if we are losing time.
So you can wrap up.
Okay, good. So our key findings within this project were that there's a need for economic incentive to scale up carbon sequestration and carbon removal markets in Europe. It's really important to increase knowledge and education between farmers, but also for the customers who pay, they want to know how to use the credits. And it would be very important to have same requirements for methodologies, and also monitoring, reporting and verification should be equal. All of the stakeholders who are in the same market. And farmers really wanted to lower the administrative burden. So one option could be that they could form some kind of pools or have more farmers to do one administrative things within the scheme. And also the scheme should consider all other sustainability aspects like social impacts and biodiversity and such.
Okay, Kirsi.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can probably make the reports available in our chat.
Yes.
There was also a very illustrative presentation and a very interesting project that you've managed to brought up in such a short time. It's really amazing. Congratulations on that. I was just a bit sorry not to see Portugal here on your pilot farms. Probably I've identified a farm in Jaén, in Spain, Castillo de Canena, maybe. Yes.
Maybe
I saw the spot there, but very interesting findings, and I think a very comprehensive view on the value chain and on the role of incentives really to scale up these projects. And actually my question to you, it's really about the incentives. We all know that companies are driven by money, and we've been showing here that also farmers, of course, as we all are towards a certain point, are moved by money, and emissions can only be reduced by charging polluters.
yes.
But apparently these mechanisms only works if these incentives are big enough. And interesting,
Yes.
that there is a study from two economists, Stern and Stilger, that argue that to meet the Paris Agreement goal, which really we all know what they are, but to limit global warming to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, carbon prices need to be between a range of $50 to $100, which is very high. currently Europe has restricted their permissions, and this drove the price to up to 60 euros per ton, which I believe it's a record high. At the farm level, when we're talking about paying credits to farmers, do you have any idea of what the price ranges would need to be so that carbon farming needs to take off? And do you actually have an idea of the current prices?
Yes, I can tell you that within our pilot, the carbon credits were sold for a price 52 euros, and from that money, 1/3 went to the farmer, which is about 16 euros. And based on our survey and interviews, it's the expectation within farmers is that they will get 20 to 100 euros per ton. So it's like they're in a low end currently.
Okay, so probably this is still not enough to a major uptake, because I don't know if you have the. Sorry, Kirsi, go ahead.
Yeah, I would believe so, that this is not really a price where the scalability will come.
Do you have an idea of the scale, so the threshold size of a farm to be able to see carbon farming or carbon credits as really an incentive?
Well, I think that it depends on the farmer and which carbon farming method he will choose, where the threshold goes or is. Because if you choose something quite easy, for example, this nutrient fiber, which were applied only once, and that is something that farmer would normally also use and pay for it. So this is like something additional that they get. But if it's if there is a risk that it reduces for example, yield, then I would imagine that the incentive should be much higher.
Okay, so we still need to do some calculations on really what is the right incentive for the market to take off. Just one clarification on your project. So the pilots that you have run, were they restricted to your pilot farm in Finland, or did you use also the practices across Europe?
Yeah, this pilot, which was done with soil food, it was only in Finland.
Only in Finland, okay.
Yes.
So we probably have a question here also of transference of transferability of the learnings here in terms of the practices to other regions in Europe.
Yes, I think the test farms where they look at the modeling for the different methods, they were all over the Europe, and they needed to adjust the models, the starting values in the model, because it considers also the climate and environmental things. So it is so that something that works in Finland, it doesn't necessarily work in Portugal. So it's very based where are you farming? You need to adjust or choose the right carbon farming method for that place.
Okay, because that brings an extra challenge. And one of my first questions was, why do we need another pilot project on carbon farming? For example, Audrey presents, that they could select their practice, but actually we need to take into consideration all the pedoclimatic conditions and the ability of soils to really store and, due to, for example, to climate change and the huge temperatures that we have here, surely has an impact on how much carbon.
Absolutely. Yes. And therefore the measuring and monitoring, if it's same for all, it might also doesn't work if everything is different in different areas.
Okay. Just one final question, Kirsi. One thing that we love about these sorts of projects is that they address very relevant questions and very important topics. But the question is, what is beyond this project? How is your ST1 company really going to benefit and to make sure that these sorts of projects are really more than just a EU-funded project?
Yes, we have proposed a pilot in Finland to test these methods, and we hope that it starts flying so we can start testing these methods in large scale in Finland.
Okay. You might even want to come to Portugal and start to test your methods here in Portugal. We also need it.
Excellent.
We'll leave this as an opportunity for future collaboration. Okay. I can also see that we already have all your reports here on the chat for those that wish to follow on a little bit more on the outcomes. So, Kirsi, thank you so much. I will now move to Rebekah from Seattle. And let me just very quickly introduce Rebekah Carlson from NORI. In the role of agriculture supply lead, Rebekah blends her experience in research and agronomy to shape NORI process and products in a manner that most effectively meets scientific rigor and farmers' needs of enrollment in the NORI carbon market. Prior to NORI, Rebekah has conducted research in agritech at MIT, and she has earned a bachelor's in biochemistry from Biola University and a master in agronomy and agroecology from the University of Minnesota. While scouting fields in Nebraska, she also worked on her extended family's farms and cow-calf operation, where she's chased and was chased by plenty of Black Angus cattle. Rebekah, this sounds like an adventure. Rebekah, thank you so much for being here. I will now hand the floor to you and very eager to hear your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Claudia, for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you all, especially in Portugal, coming from Seattle. So I'm very thrilled for the conversation. Okay, let me share my screen. All right. Okay, so my talk is about how.
Right.
Can you see my screen? All right. Okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Cool. My talk is really building up about how can carbon markets really drive sustainability, and we'll go over kind of like who NORI is. So I'll introduce NORI as the company and why we're creating a carbon marketplace, kind of what we're doing in the specifics and how farmers can enroll, and then really coming down to what does this mean for actually scaling sustainability. So let's jump in. Who is NORI? So NORI, overall, we are a startup that began in 2017, and we are a carbon removal marketplace. And though my background, as Claudia was saying, is very heavy in agriculture, and I want it to be an agricultural company, we really are more of a registry, basically, of how do we list carbon credits. So being a carbon removal marketplace is quite specific. I kind of want to back up and talk about carbon offsets. So both as Kirsi and Audrey talking about, there's a lot of ways that we can address the carbon in the atmosphere. On the graph on the right, you can see like over time, our greenhouse gas emissions are going up to like really alarming levels. And we have to have a lot of buckets of approaches to kind of address this. They have, avoidance offsets, which basically says like, now we're not removing or we're not emitting carbon. Reduction offsets, which is, doing less, right? We're capturing stuff at the point source. We are reducing our offsets, but we're not negating them. And both of those two buckets of offsets are taking this curve and really starting to flatten it. But what we need is carbon removal offsets, like the removal part, to actually bring that trend line down. So when we're looking at the removals, right? NORI itself, we are a carbon marketplace for carbon removal. Everything we're doing is taking stuff out of the atmosphere, not just emitting less. That's what we want our buyers to do. We need obviously a lot of emitting less of our emissions, but we do need to remove part of it. So that's where our marketplace is really focused on, is specifically that carbon removal. We issue NORI removal tons. So our carbon credits are called NRTs, and one NRT is representing 1 ton of carbon that's removed and retained in a reservoir, whether it's direct air capture or the soil, for 10 years. And that kind of addresses that question of persistence or permanence. When we're working with farmers, keeping records for 100 years for permanence is both not realistic for a farmer to sign up for, and the science of understanding the fluctuations of carbon in the soil is very young. And so our 10 years allows us to be really reasonable in our approach, both for our buyers and for our suppliers of our carbon. It also is a unique way for us to scale. Like if we are comparing a carbon removal offset from soil versus direct air capture, we can issue 10 NRTs for the permanence to account for the permanence of direct air capture. So we're really narrowing in on what a carbon removal is with that 10 years of persistence. So who we are and what we do. We are, obviously I just talked about, we're building a carbon removal marketplace to reverse climate change. And we're doing so in a way that uses blockchain and crypto technology. And Kirsi was talking about, we need to have a manner that isn't double counting carbon. And so we are using the blockchain, which is a public ledger that has full accountability, to list all of our carbon credits on. That allows, no double counting to happen. For example, back in the Chicago Climate Exchange in the early 2000s, like say Brazil would, sequester a lot of carbon in their forest. They would count that for their, sustainability goals. Then France would buy that carbon credit and count it for those. So that double counting is really not an option when we're using the blockchain. We're also using crypto technology, which some of Claudia's questions of like, what is the price of carbon? Crypto technology allows us to kind of have an asset, right, that is representative of 1 ton of carbon. And so that is basically creating a commodity, or like a digital grain bin, as you can see in this little illustration, where a farmer can hold on to their asset of the crypto and watch a market fluctuation. It really drives a secondary marketplace for that true price discovery, so that they can sell that credit when they believe that it's worth the price of implementing these practices. One of the things too, because one of our slogans is emit less, remove the rest, it costs a lot to reduce emissions, right? It costs a lot to have those efficiencies built into these supply chains. And so if we can have both transparency to what that costs, then we expect that price of carbon to rise to that same cost, so that people do take the work of emitting, because it's not a cheap option to just buy carbon removals. So our play of the cryptocurrency is really that key to have that transparency for what the price is of carbon. So that's kind of like the big thing. We are a carbon removal marketplace. We're working with blockchain and crypto to really drive the true price discovery of carbon, so that farmers or any suppliers of carbon can get paid. So what are we doing? Obviously, we kind of talked about it. There are a lot of ways to remove carbon. There's regenerative agriculture, afforestation, marine permaculture, direct air capture, among many, right? These are many ways that we can get carbon from the atmosphere and into a reservoir. But where we're focusing on our first methodology, while we want to scale to all of these different types, our first methodology is really focused on regenerative agriculture. And that's where my role really comes in. So regenerative agriculture, like adopting these new ways of managing land. And frankly, it's interesting. There's like new ways of managing land, but they're actually really traditional ways of managing land. So we're not asking farmers to do something totally crazy. That's actually kind of going back to traditional ways of like planting cover crops, reducing your tillage, adding in diversity of like, manure as opposed to fertilizer. All these ways allow us to really store more carbon in the soil. So when we're working with farmers, we actually look back for credit. So we're looking for farmers of those who have adopted these regenerative practices since 2011. And this allows us to look back to really reward farmers who've recently changed these practices and allows us to get the marketplace going, right? When we're talking about farming, the way that you get farming to change isn't with fancy graphs or beautiful marketing. It's really showing somebody in the community who's been paid for doing these practices and has taken the time to understand how to do it on a very localized level that we can actually get this adoption to scale. So we look back for starting these regenerative practices, and then we are US based right now. So even though we're talking in Portugal, Claudia, hopefully one day we'll scale and go across the ocean, but we're really focused right now on our US based farmers. This is really driven by what our tools are to quantify our carbon. The ones we're using now are funded by the United States. And so therefore that's kind of where we're starting. And then the last bucket of farmers who qualify are ones that have like really good records. I mean, anybody can qualify. Like we can look at records that are in a shoebox, frankly, but it's just as easier and simplifies the enrollment period if they have a robust, set of data. So then how do farmers enroll? When we're talking to farmers, like we're across the United States, farmers come to us from all sorts of practices. We have really specific, like steps to go through. So again, fields that are US and there are designated croplands, they've adopted regenerative practices since 2011. We can get digital boundaries. We have good farm records and land authority, really specific things to the United States, like they cannot be in the specific program because that wasn't prairie, because if they release carbon from a prairie that really can't be overcome by planting cover crops. And then the farmer is willing to pay a verification cost and sign a 10-year contract, which I will get to in a moment. So the first step of enrolling a farm in the NORI process is data entry, which farmers aren't in farming to keep records, but we really need this piece to ensure that we have high quality carbon credits. So we use a third-party carbon quantification tool, kind of the MRV that Audrey was talking about earlier, to model out how much change in our soil organic carbon that we have due to these regenerative practices. So we ask for up to 30 years of farm management data. Really what we're looking for is detailed records of when the farm switched. Like, did they switch to regenerative, like cover crops in 2017? Okay, we want really detailed records around then. And we can use satellite imagery and kind of targeted management practices to help fill out the rest of that 30 years, because no farmer has like a record of when they tilled in 2002. So we're really helping them in that process to build out their robust data set so that we can have robust carbon credits based off this tool. One thing too that I really want to focus on is that in carbon markets, it's really just farmers benefiting from their data in this case. And so we really want to make sure that farmers have full autonomy over their data, and we only use it to run the model. Because it's such a valuable asset for carbon markets, we believe it can be a valuable asset for the farmer in other ways. So we're only using the data to run the model, and then the farmer has that control. So once we go through this step, we run the program, we troubleshoot the model. The farmer will get this like page on their account saying like, okay, because of these practices, you'll earn up to, or you earn 5,200 NRTs in this case. And so this is a point that a farmer's like, okay, this is that times, what is my floor price for carbon, $15 or $20, is worth going into the next step. And that next step is verification. So verification is really a third party coming in and verifying that, yes, these practices took place. Again, it's such an important step for ensuring high quality carbon credits. And it's the only price that a farmer will actually pay to enroll with NORI. And it's not any price going to us, it's them paying the farmer or paying the verifier to ensure that these practices took place. And this is, again, to ensure that we're not, being fraud in our marketplace, right? If NORI is controlling the verification, it'd be really easy to get a lot of carbon credits. So having that step very third party is important, again, for these high quality carbon credits. So, and they only know this after they can see the full value of their projects so that the return on investment is net positive. Right, so they go through, great, they pass verification. The next step for enrolling in the NORI marketplace is signing a 10-year contract. And again, as Audrey's saying, like, or maybe it was Kirsi, apologies, getting farmers to sign a contract for any amount of time is not their normal operating standard, right? They operate, you know, talking to their neighbors. They're not committing to like what's going to happen in 10 years, but this conversation is one that's really important because the value of carbon comes with time. So the value of having like a higher price carbon credit is saying that we have assurance that this carbon that was sold will stay in the ground. And so this contract is saying that the carbon sold stays in the ground. You don't have to continue the same practices because we know that farmers have a lot of, you know, variance on their specific land that we don't want to hold that. We want to keep that autonomy with them, but basically like don't till up your soil and release the carbon. And if you want to continue practices or add in more practices, then we can definitely like pay for that additional amount that you've accrued, I guess, over time. But this 10-year contract is autonomy in the farmers, but also ensuring that the permanence for 10 years stays in place. So yeah, like I said, it's a 10-year commitment to keep the carbon sequestered. This agreement also allows the farmer right now in our pilot phase to set the floor price, saying I'm not willing to take less than $15 for the carbon credit because we have not launched our token yet. So it's all in the cash-based system. They have to sell at least 15% on our marketplace. And you don't sign this contract. You don't agree to like committing to the program until after you know the value of your project, you've passed verification, and this is the final step. One quick little note we have a force majeure clause as well because farming is so volatile, right? And especially as the climate is changing and our weather patterns are becoming more extreme. There will be cases where a farmer will have to till, and if that's, you know, because of weather or force majeure clause, then NORI will cover any of the emitted carbon removal or carbon credits. So then the last step is selling the NRTs, and NORI's, you know, whole business structure is we get paid when the farmer gets paid. So the farmer sets their price at $15. Well, we charge the buyer $17.25 and take 25 or 15% from the buyer themselves. And because we're in the crypto marketplace, right, we have such an in and a niche with crypto companies that need to offset their emissions from mining of crypto, from, you know, minting NFTs. So we have a lot of buyers that come from there. And it's really funny because we're connecting farmers to like the NFT world, which couldn't be more different, but it's a really cool place where people who think differently come together. So we have environmental management platforms that buy our NRTs. We have individuals that, like, I mean, I have, you know, offset my emissions from my flights by just going to nori.com. So it's a whole range, much like we want to meet all sorts of farmers enrolling in our marketplace. We also want to meet a lot of different types of buyers in our marketplace. So these are all the logistics of, you know, enrolling in the NORI marketplace, but what does this actually mean for scaling sustainability? What does it mean that in this graph that I showed at the beginning of my talk, that this green portion is actually driving change? And I think it's such an interesting point to bring up with farmers, particularly, of what it means to drive sustainability, because this is maybe one of the first times that we have an income source for the farmers that isn't just returning on investment. It's not like, oh, you're using less fertilizer, great, that helps, you know, with your buffer, you're getting more yield. It's actually a completely different income stream. And so if we can focus on that and get the price up to actually become a driving factor for like the economics of farming, right? They're very tight, but if farmers can actually make agronomic decisions based on storing more carbon in their soil, that's how we're really going to drive the sustainability. And what we've done so far, yes, we've paid over $1.8 million directly to farmers and their agronomists. And so this means like we actually are creating an economic benefit for Kelly, for Trey, for Chris, for Joe, our farmers that have been through our marketplace that have actually seen a financial benefit alongside a lot of the sustainability and ecosystem services that have come through adopting these practices. And so having that as such a driving force for sustainability, for cash-based, I think we can actually make a lot of change. So thank you. I know we're kind of at the end of the talk, but if you have questions, obviously we can talk now, but feel free to email us at hello@nori.com. So How was that?
Great, great, Rebecca. Thank you so much for your insights on the comprehensive work that Nori has been developing. Also, thank you for your passion and motivation towards, as we were talking, each of us doing our little bit to contribute to a better planet. So thanks for that. We already have some questions, but I really would like to hear your views on some of the current challenge that we have on carbon sequestration, and we've been talking about permanence and this 10-year period. And this actually goes into the measurement problems, so direct and indirect emissions. And we even saw last session that even the soil has a maximum storage capacity in terms of carbon. I don't think this is a problem at the moment. If they stay with 10 years, I'm sure that they won't hit the maximum capacity. But I don't know if whether this runs through several generations, if then this might not be a problem. So I would like to hear your comments on that. And also, we also notice, and we have here from France to Finland and the US, that we have a panoply of rules and regulations and penalties, and we are talking more at a country level or continent level. So in your view, what is the way forward? Do you think we should aim for a more integrated carbon market globally with one standard, or do you think local markets like the one you are developing, or the project that Kirsi explained, or what Audrey is doing, are they better because they are closer to farmers? They can better cater for the local specificities. So what is your view on this?
I'll start with the first question. So what is the view of, should we have a international standard for carbon, or should it be more localized? And I believe there should be a standardization of what is a carbon credit, right? What is our baseline? What are we comparing it to, so that farmers, when they're looking at different programs, aren't like, oh, I could get more for this one because it looks at it differently, right? I think there should be some standardization of what does it mean to remove and retain carbon in a really realistic way, and is that comparing to a point in time dynamic? So that kind of standardization I think is important. I'm a huge believer in voluntary marketplaces, so that a farmer in this case, or any supplier of carbon, chooses to be a part of it, because I think that will actually drive the persistence of carbon markets if it just works from an economic point of view. But that said, I do believe that there should be a lot of players in this game, right? I think it's so important to meet farmers where they're at, and there are so many different types of suppliers of carbon. So having different contracts or different approaches to what it means to sign up for a carbon marketplace, I think that diversity is really key to ensuring that we do meet the suppliers of carbon where they're at. So I think a standardization between is important, but keep going, sorry.
Yes, so no, sorry to interrupt. And one of the key message, I think that it was common throughout all of you, is that we need this engagement, and we need to be very close with farmers. And Kirsi was saying that, take the administrative burden off the farmers, and probably this more local voluntary markets has this proximity that will then allow knowledge and easier take up of what these practices actually require. So Rebecca, but we have Leonardo here with a question, actually two questions. So Rebecca, do you think with this crypto we were able to change the market, enable farmers to buy fertilizers and other chemicals? Don't you think we could be a risk to not encourage farmers to improve other sustainable practices. But I think Leonardo added some further clarification. So he gives the example in Brazil. In Brazil, farmers are using no-tillage in soybean cultivations. The carbon content of soil is improving, but they use several practices that are not sustainable. Less biodiversity, less water in the soil, contamination, and so on. How can we balance this excellent idea of the project? Sorry, this is a very long question. And Leonardo just says that he's particularly interested in Brazil because he is Brazilian. So
Great, well,
basically, is to I don't know if you basically is how can we balance, carbon storage with other sustainable practices?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking, Leo. It's a really good question. I mean, right now, sustainability, carbon is not the definition of sustainability, right? It's not the only thing that is important for all these like ecosystem services. However, it's where we have the most public buy-in, right? So I think carbon markets will be the first step in building out like kind of more of a robust like ecosystem marketplace where farmers can get paid for, better water quality. They can get credits for more diversity on their landscape, because you're right, more soybeans isn't necessarily the key to, sustainability on our landscape. But I think because we have such public interest in carbon specifically, it can open the gateway for more markets that are associated with the other ecosystem benefits. Hopefully that answers.
It spreads the word. It also spreads the word. Just one question to all of you. So tell us a little bit more about the buyers. For example, Kirsi mentioned that there are some buyers that don't like forestry projects. They prefer other type of projects. I was very puzzled with that remark. So can buyers have preference on the projects? Is that the same for you, Rebekah and Audrey? Kirsi?
Apparently, yes. That is the feedback that Soil Food has received from the buyers that have bought their credits, that the customers are not so keen about forestry projects. So maybe they are from food sector, or they are in some sort of sector that is related to farming in anyhow.
And is it the same for you, Rebekah? Do you feel that your buyers want to kind of extend throughout their value chain this carbon removal? So as Kirsten was saying, if it is a food sector, or if I'm doing yogurts, I want to be in the dairy farming parts.
Yeah, we do see, whether it's like the companies of crypto, like we're part of their like carbon removal portfolio. So they'll have some of their offset money going to forests, some going to blue carbon, and some going to regenerative agriculture. But then there are specific buyers that want to, buy from the farmers in the states that they're from, kind of thing. So they're getting a bit specific on their wants, but we do want to be part of a portfolio because, like, for example, forests, like Microsoft's big purchase of forests in Oregon, like they all went up in flames literally last year. So it's really important to balance it.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting aspect. Great. Audrey, what about your clients? What do they look for?
Well, indeed, if we go to the food sector, of course, they are interested in buying carbon credits from their own supply chain. But this is something that we wanted to develop. And as I was presenting, we are also thinking of new types of financing with that type of actors, actually. So to add to complement carbon credits. So it's something that needs to be thought and more developed. But yeah, of course, that the supply chain are definitely an axis of developing carbon farming. That's for sure.
Okay, so it's just another question. Which part of the marketplace is more challenging? Is it working with farmer or is it getting to these corporates?
So who should answer first?
Yes, Audrey.
Okay. I think, yeah, it's a new market. So in any case, we're gonna face some progress on both sides, and also some obstacles on both sides. So yeah, for farming, as I was mentioning, supply is depleting, so it's really we need to incentivize them. And on the other side, sooner or later, we were going to face a lot of demand on the side of carbon credits market. So for now, nothing is more difficult than the other. There is no such a unbalance. But yeah, it's going to be maybe more challenging in the future to meet those demand and supply. Yeah.
Rebekah, do you have the same perspective?
Yeah, I would we need pioneers in both spaces. As Audrey's saying, it's like a new marketplace. So people are like, what's going to happen, and not really willing to engage very quickly. But granted, because I'm on the ag side, I'm like, maybe ag is a little bit harder, because getting farmers to change practices is way harder than getting a company to spend a little more money, because it's their whole operation. So that's been a big challenge for us.
That would be my gut feeling, but let's hear Kirsi to see if she has the same experience.
Yes, as well, we operate in the demand sector. We would like to invest a lot into the carbon credits, but currently there is no way, we don't know how to use it. So we can't use it to fill our mandates, and we struggle a little bit that problem. But also we found out within this project that farmers are very not easy to change the practices, and they need a lot of information and education that why they should do it, and also the incentive should be very clear that they really would start doing it. So I think the demand sector and supply sector are quite far from each other if we think of scaling this up like in a large scale market.
Okay, good. We are really over our time, but just one final question. One advice from each of you for all of us as consumers, as individuals. What practices, what can we do in our daily life to contribute to carbon removal? Who has thought of that? I'm sure Kirsi must cycle a lot, because you do cycle a lot in the north.
Yes, but that is not carbon credits yet. It's just reducing emissions, but it's a good option.
Okay, good. Audrey, what would you recommend?
As individual relating to carbon farming, maybe one thing that we can do is speak with farmers and try to understand how they practice their agriculture, and maybe promote carbon farming on each own scale somehow. Okay,
and eventually to start by their product instead of going so often to the supermarket.
Exactly.
And Rebekah, what's your advice?
Well, agree with Kirsi and Audrey, but also you can go to nori.com and purchase a carbon removal credit from farmers that we're supplying from. So there we go.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh, well done. Okay, we need to put the close here. Thank you so much. I really enjoy the time here with you. I hope all the participants also had the opportunity to clarify some more of our issue. I thank you a lot for your presence, and to all of you. We'll be back next week at the same time in the same place. So thank you very much for being here with us. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.